You did it! You made it to the next Saturday, which is now, which is today.
Was it as exciting for you as like waiting for your next episode of your favorite show? I'm sure it was.
Probably not. But if it was, thank you.
Here's part 2.
Question 3.
The third question is, how can I best...
Hold on, did you see my pinky? We're gonna have to run that back. It was bad.
Oh.
Let me try again. Question 3. Oh, wait. 3. Question 3.
I don't know what's going on.
I'm faltering.
Okay. The third question is, how can I best support my Black spouse, especially during this time? And I will answer, but I want Bedford to first talk about the ways that he feels the most supported or things that make him feel supported, especially right now.
Okay, so for me, I haven't even heard this question before, so we're kind of piecing together as we go.
Which I sometimes think is the best way to do it.
The things that my wife does and that other individuals have done in my life to make me feel the most comfortable is to actually not fear the topic and have questions and be able to have conversations, right? And I do think that I have positioned myself as someone that a lot of people close to me can trust and can ask the hard questions. The least comfortable thing that can come across is that when somebody is scared to ask a question or someone is frightened to maybe bridge a topic, but at the same time it's very, very apparent that it's a topic that's on top of mind or it's something that they're dancing around, and it's just like, now it's awkward for everybody, let's just talk about it. So that's something that my wife does a really good job at. Opens the door for individuals around us to have the conversation, and quite frankly, behind closed doors, when we need to have conversations and when I don't understand maybe an idea or a thought, we are able to have that, and we're able to say, hey, and quite frankly, we can get decently heated about it and get into like the nitty-gritty principles and still know that my wife loves me and is trying to understand, and I love her and I'm also trying to understand, and like the world is not going to end based on some of the topics. At the same time, we typically do get around to understanding some viewpoints. There's some things that like Chelsie just straight up doesn't understand, and is constantly learning, and vice versa. I am constantly learning, and maybe I've been able to apply a little bit more grace in some situations because of her point of view.
Something that I think that has been really important for me is to understand that what I learned, we were actually just talking about this today, the way that I grew up and everything that I learned, every experience, everything that I took in, conversations that I've had, I mean, everything, school, my friends, all of those things were not what he experienced growing up. And there is a lot of value in understanding that the white experience and the Black experience are completely different. And when we met, we had spent upwards of 20 years in that experience. And having certain, like, there are some things that Bedford will tell me and he'll say, hey, this is offensive and this is why. And it clicks immediately. And I think, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. I get that. There are some things that are really hard for me to wrap my head around. And I think that a lot of the reason why is because coming around to understanding the Black experience as a white individual requires a lot that is hard to do. Because you start asking yourself these questions like, what was I ignoring? What was I so naive to? Like, what was in front of my face that I just wasn't paying attention to? And the term white privilege, it feels forceful sometimes because you're like, what? And there's almost this like, I don't want to call it a grieving process, but there's a process to it where there's a denial stage, which happens sometimes in our arguments because it's easier for me to deny that what he's saying is true than to admit that I was so blind. Even if it was unintentional. And so I think that there's a process to it. And when I'm in denial, it takes longer. It takes time for me to go through the process of realizing like, I was so closed-minded. And those are embarrassing things to admit, and they're hard to admit. And so I think that in this conversation, in having the discussion of ways that I can like support him, is try to be open-minded. And then in the circumstances where I find myself very closed off, like, no, I don't agree. I don't understand that. Understanding that his experience is not my experience, and it is not my job to tell him how he can or cannot feel. And so it's an ever growing process. And I think that the best thing that you can do is have the conversation, because it's not helpful to say, I don't agree, but I don't want to come across as closed-minded, so we're just not going to talk about it. That's the worst thing you can do. And then when you find yourself closing off, understand that it could totally just be your experience, and how can you change your thought process? And how can you maybe alter that so that you can be more understanding, accepting, and loving of what they're going through and maybe how they're feeling.
So like, perfect example of this. We're at Walmart, me and her, without the kids. It's a fantastic day.
I don't even remember.
Yeah, you will.
Oh, okay.
We're at Walmart, we're checking out. Bloop, bloop. I print out the receipt, right? It's a self-checkout. The receipt comes out. Chelsie grabs the receipt. She throws the receipt away. I'm like, what are you doing?
He's digging through the garbage for the receipt.
I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Like,
I think he's ridiculous.
This is ridiculous. And we're getting into it a little bit. Like, why would you do that? You can't just throw away the receipts. So my experience is, you gotta keep the receipts. Let me tell you why you gotta keep the receipts. Because quite often, you gotta prove that you purchased what you purchased, okay? That happens in my life. It happens enough to where every single time I go to the store, I got my receipt on me. I ain't gotta prove nothing, because it's right here. Boom. Even my name with the debit card. I know where that is. So Chelsea's like, you are out of your mind. I have never once been asked for a receipt. I'm like, that's you, okay? And we kind of got into it. She was a little bit defensive. I can understand that, like, that's her experience. She's never had that. Now, at the same time, we've been married like 6 years, and she had never it never occurred to her. No, 6 years at the time. We just barely hit 7.
All right, fine.
Give me that. It's been 17 days. This did not happen within the last 17 days.
I thought you were saying that we've been married 7 years as of now.
This woman. About to get into it right now.
Okay.
So back when we were married 6 years, she had not realized that every time that we've ever been to a store, I had always had my receipt. And she had thrown a receipt away, and I was like, whoa, that breaks the code. What are you doing? And so for her, she was like, you are insane. Why are we doing this? There's no way that this happens. I've lived my life, 30 some odd years. I'm not going to tell you her age. Maybe it's 20 some odd years. It's never happened to me. And the funny thing was that, like, I took the receipt. We started walking out the door. Bing. Hey, can I see the receipt for what you purchased? And I was like, see? Now, I cannot fault her for the fact that for 30 years, never once has a receipt been applicable. And I cannot fault her for not knowing that for 30 years, my receipt has been applicable frequently, all right? Because she's never been me. I promise you, the second that she noticed, that day, she was like, holy crap. I have never even known that you do that. I've never known that it's been applicable. And I didn't even think that, we were arguing 4 minutes from now, that you would need to prove, you would have to have a receipt to show your exit.
I mean, this has totally evolved as we've talked about this question, but I truly think that the best way that I can support him is to listen and then communicate. When you are in this relationship, it is not an option to shut down. You don't get that option. If you don't understand, you have that conversation over and over and over again, no matter how many times it takes, because it's important and it matters, especially when you have kids and you're going to be raising your children. You want to be on the same page, especially when it comes to race.
And I think particularly, like, the best case scenarios have been when we've been able to keep a level head and still have that discussion and really get to the nitty gritty of it. And we're not great at it always. There's been some times where there's been some sweat beads, but
crying.
I think when you're having those discussions, like, you need to understand that this is a discussion that is and we've done a decent, I think we actually done a really good job of that. I know that when we're having the discussion, it's so that Chelsie understands me a little bit more and that I understand her a little bit more so that we can grow together. That's why we're having those discussions. I'm not here to oppress Chelsie. Chelsie is not here to oppress or even belittle me, right? That's not happening. What we're doing is having a conversation so that we can get in line with each other and push forward and raise our family.
All right. Question number 4 is about the kids. The question is, when and how is the appropriate way to have a conversation about race with my children? When is always, and how is going to be based on age. And not only age, but what is your child capable of intaking and what type of information are they capable of processing? And I think that every parent understands their child and they know their child well enough to understand what they are capable of processing and what they are not. For example, after the George Floyd murder, I had friends that had children that were the same age as my kids. And they were showing them the video, they were having that conversation, and I know that my 9-year-old would not be able to visually see that video and forget. Like, that would be in his brain forever, and it would emotionally take a toll. It would take a toll on him. So we chose not to show him the video, but instead to have the conversation with our 9-year-old only, because he is old enough to process that information. We decided to have the conversation with our 9-year-old about what was going on in the world, what had happened, and how we felt about it. But we chose not to show him the video. I don't fault any parents that did. I don't fault parents who allowed their children to watch the video. I just knew that my child was not old enough to process, he was not in a position to be able to process that information appropriately. And I think that that's important to take into consideration. So with our 9-year-old, that's how we've decided to handle things. We tell him when things are in the news because we don't want him to hear it anywhere else. We want him to hear it from us.
So with our younger kids, we have a race discussions and updates and world things as appropriate. My 6-year-old's not ready. He's not ready for everything just yet. We will have those discussions as things come out, and to be quite frank, I'm probably going to approach it in a way that is very similar to how I was raised. Okay, so for me, race wasn't ever an excuse, and my parents taught me about those things and those situations as it became very apparent that they were applicable to me that day, right? So if I never once was the kid that got to maybe say that I was discriminated against unless it became real. All right, so there was never a thought in my head that some of my buffoonery, because I was kind of a clown, I didn't get the best grades, and a lot of it was all of it was my fault. But there were situations that occurred in class with teachers, in situations at stores, it became very apparent, and my parents taught me those lessons right then and there. But at the end of the day, I did not get a pass ever when I had any sort of accountability. And that's kind of how we're going to be discussing it with our kids. Accountability, all of them, all of our kids, my white one too, will be accountable first for all of their actions. And then at the end of the day, we will have discussions about appropriate things that need to be happening in terms of race. What is completely unacceptable, what you will fight against and you will right, and things that are like you just won't stand for. You won't let it happen next to you, by you, around you. We will have those conversations, and our kids will be well versed in those as they need to.
One of the things, something that I didn't know about is that a lot of Black families have what they call the talk with their kids. Just maybe what to expect, or maybe some of the things that they may experience growing up. So I went to Bedford and I said, at what age do you want to have that talk with our kids? Because I respected that. It wasn't something I grew up with, obviously, but I respected that that's what Black families did, and that's conversation that they had. So, and I said, when do you want to do that? And he said, when it matters, when it's applicable, when it happens. And he was like, I am not about, and I loved this because it's something I hadn't thought about, but he said, I'm not about to send my 6-year-old to school and have him see a couple kids looking at him and talking, and he thinks that they don't like him because of the color of his skin, but really they just think his shoes are dope. And I was like, I'm gonna cry because I'm pregnant, okay? But I was grateful for that moment because I don't want my children to feel that way. I don't want them to think that every glance, especially when kids aren't really old enough to process that, you know? They're not capable of assuming the best, you know?
In fact, no, they are capable. They almost always.
I'm saying naturally they do, but if you give them the opposite, they're not capable of deciding when it's the best and when it's not. And I was afraid that I would plant that fear in my children, that they would no longer think that people just thought they were cool, you know? As a matter of fact, when we're out as a family and we see people like looking at us or like whispering, our first reaction is like, they probably just think our family is pretty cute. Like, because that's what we want to think. And so I do think that with our younger children, we have the conversation of, why am I brown? Dad's black, mom's white, you're brown. Because that's their level of understanding, and we know that about our kids. And as they grow up, I mean, we try to keep books in our house about, you know, different people, different inventors, different history. We try to approach things.
Even pop culture stuff. Like my kids read, what is it, A to Z with 50 Cent?
Yeah, it's called A, B to Jay-Z. When we talk about our kids, we talk about genetics, history, and then different experiences that we have had. And we try to keep it that way.
And quite frankly, even reasons to be proud to be white, reasons to be proud to be brown, reasons to be proud to be part of a Haitian American family. You know, there's a lot of dope stuff that I'm trying to instill in my kids. I will not have them be ashamed.
And we're not trying to hide that it's ugly out there sometimes. We're not. But I think that sometimes with everything that's going on, it's kind of like, I mean, you look at the conversation we were having earlier, and when I was like, it's the number one thing we receive, and Bedford was like, no, it's not. The number one thing we receive is good. The second one is a little rough. And sometimes I think it's easy to think, oh, that's easily the number one thing, but it's not. And so we want our kids to know that the number one thing is good. And then there are some things that are going to be difficult, and we are going to deal with that as a family. We will figure that out. I will be your biggest cheerleader. We will figure it out. We're going to take care of this. It's a family issue. But number one, this is a good thing. And we don't ever want them to think that it's not. All right, the fifth and final question is a little bit of a two-part question, and we'll each take a second to answer both parts, and then we will address some other questions that we received maybe on a separate video, or I'll do it through the Instagram. But what is the biggest blessing about being in an interracial relationship, and what is the hardest thing about being in an interracial relationship? I'll let you go first.
Biggest blessing is I have a very safe alternative point of view and I have a very safe spot to express my point of view and understand another point of view and then determine my values and adjust if needed or not based on the information that I get from someone that I trust and love a whole lot. That's a huge blessing. There's not a lot of people that have that blessing. Biggest disadvantage. Oh yeah, another huge event. My kids, man, they cute. They cute.
They are.
Little Maya. I know y'all seen her. Biggest disadvantage, to get back to that. I think the biggest disadvantage is sometimes you walk in naive, thinking that things are going to be easier than they were. And quite frankly, I didn't think it was going to be easy. I actually assumed it would be hard. I just didn't understand how hard and from what angles it was going to be hard at. There's some times where you're just shocked and appalled, like, yo, you too? And it could be someone close. It could be someone that you literally thinks the exact same as you. And that's difficult. It's hard to do. Also, it's really, really difficult to maybe look at some of the comments that, especially in the social media world, that my wife reads and are targeted towards her about her not being a good enough mom for my kids, that about her not knowing how to do things like my daughter's hair, or you know, I didn't wear lotion in one picture because I was mowing the lawn. She got slaughtered. That's unfair. That sucks. And you don't understand maybe how difficult. I'm like, yo, I don't really care what a lot of people say. That's fine. I literally, it's sweat off my back. Y'all can say whatever you want in the comments. Go at me. She's not the same. And it's rough watching some of those comments because nobody in the world is more qualified to raise my kid than this woman right here. Don't you cry. You cry on here. I'm gonna leave it up there.
It's fine. Oh man. Okay. I think that the greatest advantage is, you know, Bedford touched on it for us, and like the diversity that we have as a couple to be able to, there's been plenty of times that he's been like, this is common sense. And I'm like, whoa, listen, from my angle, it's not, you know, or, and then he's like, it's not. And I'm like, no, think about it. You know, we have these conversations where I feel hurt, but this is also a safe space for us. We can have these conversations, and it's not some random person on the internet. It's not some article that I read online. It's not somebody on the news. It's somebody that I know has my best interest in mind and wants the best for me, him, and us. And so when he's coming to me with something, the ultimate goal is we're going to grow through this. So however that conversation ends up, I know that what he says is his desire to grow, and he's very open-minded. And so when he says something to me, I know it's legit. What I want to say is that the biggest benefit, I think, is how our children, the perspectives that our children get to grow up with. And I think that that's valuable, because I think that our kids get to see both sides of the coin. They get both people's opinions, even if it's blended together, even if it's a joint opinion. It came from a lot of discussion. It came from a lot of tears. It came from a lot of arguments. It came from a lot of late nights. What our kids take from us, it took time to get there. And that's what they get from us. And that's what they get to take out into the world. And I'm grateful for that. I think that the hardest thing for me is, you know, sometimes it feels like you don't fully belong in either space. Sometimes, you know, because not everyone in the white community accepts your union or your marriage or your relationship or your children. They're not black enough, or well, on the other side, right? Like in the black community, sometimes they're not black enough. They're not whatever. In the white community, I've heard people call them mixed breeds or things. And so sometimes it's hard because everybody wants belonging. You want to belong somewhere. You want to be able to plant your feet somewhere and feel like that's where you stick. And I think that sometimes it's hard, you know, to feel unaccepted because of your race. And I think that that's hard. And I do think that the backlash from both sides, feeling like, you know, you can't ever say or do anything right. And that's hard. But I think that, you know, we've kind of just come to the realization that all that matters is this: us and our kids. Do we agree? Are we trying to see eye to eye? And are we comfortable with the decisions that we made? And if that's the case, then we're good.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
You done?
You know what? This is a topic we could talk about probably forever. We have hours and hours and hours long, well, together.
I might not have said 50 words.
Stop that. But what I'm saying is that
Continue saying.
we have had really good conversations in this, and I think that it's something we could expound on for ever. So we'll wrap up this video. Those are the 5 most frequently asked questions when it comes to race, mixed families, and kind of that conversation as a whole. You can ask whatever other questions you want in the comments, and it's something that we can look at, and maybe this is something we can do more regularly. And that's it.
All right. Always about the plug. You forgot to plug. We got to plug.
Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe.
Like, subscribe. Comment. Really helps out. The algorithm is a finicky thing, so we're not asking for your money, but we're asking for your support.
The best thing that you can do to support any content creators is like, share, comment, subscribe, follow, any of those things. That's the best thing that you can do for content creators. And so we appreciate any of the love that you send in that way. So
peace.